Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Curious Realms continuing coverage of MUFON Symposium 2023 here in Covington, Kentucky. Our guest in this segment is Ray Szymanski. He is the author of The 50 Shades of Grey, as well as Swamp Gas My Ass, and Alien Shades of Grey. He is a former Air Force employee who worked for the government for many years right down the road here at Wright-Patterson Airforce Base, correct?
Yes, about an hour's drive north on I-75.
Wow. And what exactly did you do at Wright-Patterson? What was your job for so many years?
Well, I retired in 2011 as a senior scientist / senior engineer. So when you first start at Wright-Pat, you're taken under the wing of the senior people. So one of the things that I did was they would design circuits. I would lay out the circuit boards. I would load them with the components, and then the senior engineers would come along, and together we would test them. So it was a learning process.
Okay.
And some of those boards and designs eventually made their way into satellites, as an example. What
Sure.
type of satellites, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
So as you go along, you get more responsibility. And one of the longest running jobs I had was with the Ada Joint Program Office. Now, the Ada Joint Program Office was subsidized by the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering. And the purpose of that was to develop a singular programming language for real-time embedded weapon systems.
Ooh.
So anything shipborne or tank-borne or airborne would be developed in a programming language. And the reason they wanted to do that is because they had done a survey and determined that there were hundreds of different languages and dialects being used to program all the little, microprocessors that were coming into the fore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in order to financially make it cheaper, maybe to move people around from project to project, instead of having them to learn a new programming language or a dialect, they could just all do Ada.
Yeah.
And so for 10 years, I worked for the Ada Joint Program Office developing test suites that would test the performance characteristics of some of the tools, the software tools used for Ada development.
Wow. And yeah, to know that they're all on the same programming language, make sure that there's no competition between components, things like that, that one component understands what the other component's doing.
Well, there would be a compatibility
kind of
issue there, but imagine you've got a team that you've trained and they've all learned Ada, because learning a new programming language can be easy for some. So if you have a singular programming language and you say, well, we only need 3 programmers now and we've got 10 on this missile program, let's move those free 7 up to maybe a tank program or some other program. So there's keep the costs down, because the government is paying these people to learn Ada, and then if we have the same contractor or maybe the same group of contractors, we know and they know that we're going to use the singular programming language.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of advantages to doing that, and that was one of the largest jobs I did for a long span of my career, basically 25% of my career.
Wow. And yeah, I mean, Wright-Pat is a huge R&D facility. They do tons of weapons design, all kinds of things. And of course, is famed for possibly being one of the locations of alien technology, alien bodies.
Let's open that can of worms.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and open it, because it's quite literally been an interesting conversation over the last year and a half, just since the last MUFON Symposium, where it was Friend or Foe 1.0. How is the media treated UFOs, UAPs, things like that? And even to see the one thing I brought up on the show regularly, to see the media's rapid turn and use of the word UFO denier, like randomly out of nowhere. It was like all these people who were once like, hey, look at Crazy Joe who's over there talking about his car stopped because of a UFO. Now we're using the term UFO denier suddenly. So it was funny to see that flip of the media, and it's been interesting to see the flip of our government, the flip of the Senate. One thing I've been bringing up to people is, yes, let's forget little green men. Let's talk about monetary accountability. Were you cool with Iran-Contra? Were you cool with the Pentagon Papers that showed that there were these shifty things that went along to make money happen and get weapons somewhere else? apparently this whistleblower has said that there is something much bigger than that going on since 1939 with your money in your government, dealing with UFOs and UFO technology and possible recovered aircraft, things like that. So
Who would be that whistleblower?
that Grush.
Oh,
Grush. And the recent whistleblower testimonies that just happened, that was a big part of it. The fact of the money trails that lead through special projects, things like that, how things get compartmentalized, so that oversight committees don't know where that money goes.
Now, let's go back to a point that you brought up earlier, the Wright-Pat UFO connection.
Yes.
And you talked about advanced technologies. Well, for my entire career, I worked as an employee of Air Force Research Labs. So the Air Force has, well, the labs used to be scattered. A lot of the consolidation has now happened at Wright-Patterson Airforce Base. They're leading edge. They're looking 30 years out and further. So could we have used some of the technology that was recovered in crash craft? It's definitely a possibility. Are we ready to release that? Do I know if they've done that? No, I don't know. Yeah. But there are stories that has happened. And let's touch upon the initial connection. Major Jesse Marcel, in a 1978 interview with Stanton Friedman, said, we recovered a crash craft, and those pieces went to Wright-Patterson Airforce Base. Now, that was 1978.
Yeah.
I entered Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1973. Now, it's 5 years before it went public. My mentor, the guy that was assigned to me and who I discuss extensively in my first book, 50 Shades of Grace, took me under his wing one day as we were going through a deserted hangar going to a business building, which was on the other end of our building. And he said, have you heard about our aliens? So I'm a co-op student from the University of Detroit, and I don't know aliens from Jack. So I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, there was a crash out west, and they recovered the craft, and that craft now sits at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's being examined, and exploited. Well, it wasn't until 5 years later that Jesse Marcel and the world, through Stanton Friedman, let it be known that Wright-Pat had this distinct connection. How Al, who is my mentor, knew about this, I don't know, but I can say that Al went on to become a member of the Senior Executive Service. So at the time, he was a mid-level engineer. Now, the Senior Executive Service is the equivalent of a military general or an admiral. So the guy speaking to me about a alien crash craft connection 5 years before it came public went on to become a member of the Senior Executive Service. So I don't want to belabor the point, but again, this was somebody who went on to have a fabulous career.
Yeah.
It always bugged me. How did he know? And where did he get this information from? Was it a rumor that he just expanded upon, or he had a gut feel? I don't know. But there's been that long-standing connection between Wright-Patterson and, of course, the labs are there.
Yeah.
So in 1947, when that material was brought to Wright-Patterson, and we know it was because Jesse Marcel said it was, and the guy who was the chief of staff of the 8th Army Air Corps, where that stuff came to initially before it went to Wright-Pat. And he signed an affidavit, so we know it went to Wright-Pat. It went to the Materials Directorate, probably in a little briefcase. They opened it up and they said, tell us what you know about this. We'll come back in 6 months and give us a report. And then there was only one copy made. And that's what needs to be tracked down. Where did that singular report go on the official Roswell crash wreckage? We know who did it. We know where it is somewhere.
Yeah.
But there's probably only one copy.
Man, that's just remarkable to think about. Because, I mean, the concept of the Roswell crash, the idea of the Roswell crash has, of course, haunted ufology for decades, and is just now coming to light in a lot of ways. Once again, with the whistleblower testimonies, with the idea that, there are secret programs that back engineer things, that look at things. Much like Philip Corso said long ago, like lasers, fiber optics, things like that, all came from that technology. and was back engineered. And to know, one of the things I bring up on the show regularly is the fact of any computer you go out and buy is 10 years old at a minimum by any military spec. It is old technology. They've already had that and used it, and they're in a different realm of technology than what we have on our commercial shelves.
It depends on the technology you're talking about. Sometimes the military is ahead, sometimes industry is ahead, and commercial. But I'll lay a story on you and your listening audience. There was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Bill Edwards. Now, the world doesn't know Bill Edwards because what Bill Edwards did is he kind of brought the world into the solid state world, and he was the head of a division, I think it was called microelectronic circuits. And basically, when solid state first became a viable solution and was going to replace the vacuum tubes, inside Air Force Research Labs, Bill Edwards was running a program to help accelerate that. And one of the groups he was working with eventually became known as Texas Instruments. And as everybody knows, TI was one of the very first to develop the integrated circuit.
That's right.
And it was Bill Edwards' group in conjunction with commercial entities who helped bring them from hard soldered pieces of silicon and wire to putting TI in business, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, the story is that I used to play basketball recreationally at Wright-Pat, and
Wow.
during our afternoon games, I would regularly go up against Bill Edwards. So I got to know him on the court, and he and I worked in the same building, only a floor apart. So after I retired and I was starting to develop my first book, I intercepted Bill Edwards at the gym. He's retired, I'm retired, so it's a little safety factor. And I wanted to revisit the mythology, we'll call it, of Colonel Corso and how he ceded the solid state technology to Bell Labs and that it unstuck them from what they were doing. And at one point, they just couldn't get the doping right. It's doping is when you put like arsenic or something and it enables the carriers.
Yes.
So as the story goes, they discovered by back engineering that they were using the wrong dopant, and then once they got the right dopant, then the transistor was born.
Yeah.
Well, I took that story to Bill Edwards because if anybody would know that, Bill would, because he worked that from day one.
Pioneered the transistor.
So I asked him a direct question, putting my long-standing, jump shot
on the line,
which I used to in your face, Bill.
Yeah.
I put that at risk, and I told that backstory to him, and I asked him point blank, what is your take on this story that it was reverse engineering of alien artifacts that got Bell Labs over the hump and got you guys, because I knew his story, into the integrated circuit thing? And he just shook his head and he said, there are gaps in my knowledge, but I know I've had access to all of those root papers, and I would tell you that it was just hard work and human ingenuity that got us to where we are today. I don't see that as part of the story.
Yeah.
So for me, and again, I that was the end of the conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, there were some, how's your health and that sort of thing, enjoying retirement. But here was a guy, and I'm sure you can look him up in all the papers he wrote, that he basically told me point blank, no, I really think it was just because he was part of that hard work and that ingenuity.
Yeah.
So I don't want to throw cold water on it. I don't want to say it's the definitive answer, but this is a source that now you have information from that you can't get to, and that I had an opportunity to chat with only because I knew him from the gym.
Yeah, because you had a personal relationship with him to begin with.
Yeah, and then I would see him, and I knew guys that worked for him, and we would cross paths in the building.
Well, and there's definitely that fact of, I can neither confirm nor deny that that's the case. Would have probably been the answer, were it the answer.
But he was open. He was
Yeah.
open with me, and it was easily defensible.
Well-
and Bill was a straight shooter. He was a no nonsense guy.
Yep.
So for me, I took it at face value.
Well, and we have the conversation regularly when it comes to ancient sites, ancient aliens, things like that. That like we regularly dismiss the ingenuity of humanity, and they were hot on the trail of the transistor, and especially the miniaturization of the transistor from transistor radio to microchip. They were already on that path right up around that time, and miniaturization really helped that along, being able to throw thousands of transistors onto a chip. And
well, to bring the story to a close, a friend of mine, his name is Ray Rang. He was the historian from Air Force Research Labs after he retired. And Ray was a personal friend of mine. In fact, when he left staff, it was a promotion for me. He was leaving staff to go back to my home organization, and I was taking his place up on staff. So I was going to work indirectly for the head of Air Force Research Labs at the time, who was a general. It was called Wright Labs at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So Ray Rang was a personal friend. I had, again, retired, but I got a visitor pass to go back into the building where I knew Ray was working. I coordinated with him, and he is now writing all about the history of the Census Directorate where I worked, and they were having people come in and interviews and stories, and he's backfilling information he didn't have. He was going to write something for the archives. So I posed the same question to him. I said, now, I talked to Bill Edwards about this, and you're the historian, and I know you've got other insight. And I laid the story out about the transistors and everything else. And he goes, get out of my office. He literally, he didn't want to hear about aliens. He didn't care. He was just saying, Bill's story's my story. Get out of my office.
Yeah, like enough with that foolishness.
Never spoken to Ray Rang again. Never.
oh my God.
And it's not my fault.
Yeah.
So, they shut the door on me.
Well, and granted, working in such a facility, having a career with such technology, what was some of the most amazing things, projects that you got to work on that you can talk about?
I would say, first of all, I mentioned the Ada thing, and if you use my last name and the name Ada is actually the Countess Ada, the world's first computer programmer.
Yeah.
Just type in Ada and my last name, and you'll see some public reports that I did because I guided this team, mostly PhDs from around the country. We met quarterly. We developed technology that actually got blended in on the international level. So a lot of my work is public. But some of my early work, I think, was the most interesting simply because they would bring something in and say, we need you to analyze this circuit board. We want you to take it and create a schematic. So I would get in there and I would have to read the board, lay out the traces, put the components in there, and then a senior scientist would come in and go, thank you very much, grab my stuff, and I'd never hear from him again. And
Wow.
And what I was told is, and I did this as a co-op student and as a young engineer because they would pay us overtime. And they wouldn't tell us who they were or where they came from, but our boss was involved in this, and he would say, it's an opportunity to get overtime money. You're coming in on a weekend. You're going to work in this vault. There's going to be somebody outside the door, somebody inside with you, and they're going to pull a card out of something, and then your job is to reverse engineer it. So I didn't analyze the circuitry, but I had to tell them. I had to go from the board and
the parts that are on it,
the pieces parts, and then create a diagram so they could see it. So I would, draw the resistor in there, the capacitors, the inductors, and if there was anything funky, and then you would read, if you could, read the values of the how many microfarads or the resistor, how many ohms and stuff, and then they would go in and check it, and then it's like, I thank you very much, and then maybe the next time you get a different board and you do the same thing. So knowing that I was doing a reverse engineer of sorts was really cool, but you had no other knowledge, and they just said, keep this to yourself, okay? So now it's 1973 to today. How many years was that? 50 years? It's who knows? It's space junk now.
Yeah.
But back then it was really exciting. So I think that was a cool part. And then eventually, you do executive things where I ran contracts for years and more of an engineering thing. And then I was selected to develop a base-wide wellness program for Wright-Patterson Airforce Base. I was responsible for improving the wellness of 12,000 base employees.
Wow.
And thousands of employees around the country that were satellite offices of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So for 2 years, I was a direct report to Colonel Spacey, who was the base commander. And I was a direct report at the same time to Joe Szymanski, who was the Air Force Research Lab executive director. We always have a general on the top, but the guy who does the work, the thunder and lightning, is the executive director. And at that time, Joe Szymanski granted me a 2-year executive loan to the 88th Air Base Wing, so I was a direct report. And it was a fascinating job. I knew thousands of people. And we saved hundreds of lives by doing medical screenings, people that were on the verge of strokes and heart attacks with high blood pressure, high cholesterol. We screened them out, and we got them to take care of their issues.
Awesome.
In fact, Joe Szymanski is one of our success stories. And that's why, I was working for him, doing it for Air Force Research Labs. And then we literally saved his life.
Wow.
Literally saved his life because we found him, and I can't go against HIPAA laws, but I can tell you that he had one of the highest blood pressures and highest cholesterol levels ever recorded by my medical staff.
Wow.
And so I called back where he came from Kirtland Air Force Base, and I talked to his secretary. And she goes, oh, yeah, Joe lost 50 pounds, but he would go to the Mexican restaurant across the street every day for lunch. And I go, you couldn't get a higher cholesterol
count.
Plus, he had some genetic things.
I'm from Texas. I love my Mexican food, but
you know that. So that for me, that was one of the most outstanding jobs that I had because now I'm a GS-14. Yeah. I'm an executive level person, and all that technology is now behind me. So you just felt that of all the contributions I made, and I think I made a lot, that was the one that was the most palatable.
Okay.
Where people will come up to me, say, thank you for that screening, And then I took my husband, who's not an employee, I took him to get screened, and we found he had problems. And so that was just really exciting for me. The Air Force takes care of its people.
It does.
That's the message I want your viewers to understand.
Yeah.
The Air Force takes care of their people.
Awesome. And, right now a lot of the conversation is whistleblowers, technology, hidden government programs, things like that. What do you see for the coming future of disclosure, UFO, UAP studies, Ray?
That's a great question. I'm really bad at predicting.
That's okay.
And I'll tell you why, because I was on a radio show or a podcast maybe within the last, this would have to be, Swamp Gas My Ass came out in April of 2021, and 2 months later, the ODNI report came out that said, flying saucers are real, guys.
Yeah.
So it had to be a show prior to that disclosure, and I know the book hadn't come out yet. So let's say in January of 2021, somebody on the podcast asked me, in your lifetime, do you believe there's going to be disclosure? Yeah. And historically funny is I said, no. I mean,
I don't think so.
But I gave a cryptic answer like, there's going to be disclosure from the government, but not directly. And I was alluding to the fact of my new book coming out, and a full colonel, was telling his story about intercepting the 1966 swamp gas flying saucers over southeastern Michigan. That's what Swamp Gas My Ass is all about. So I knew that. I knew it was coming out soon. And so I made that little cryptic remark, kind of hedging my bets. But I couldn't have been more dead wrong about
the situation and what would ensue,
So let me answer your question. things are starting to avalanche, but there are dark forces about. There are people, there's only a single segment of the government that wants disclosure right now. And the dark forces are still afoot. So I think, can the dark forces be overcome? Because Congress goes, we want all this data. Well, look at Reagan couldn't get the data. Bush couldn't get both Bushes couldn't get the data. And
the congressman that said we will withhold your money is no longer on the panel, from what I understand. He said that, and about 2 weeks later, they're like, so we've got a new assignment for you, my friend. It's like...
Is this a form of Clinton side?
Yeah. It's kind of like they said, I'm sure you could tell us where they are, but the next day the moving vans would pull up, it would all be moved as soon as you disclosed where it was.
Carter didn't. And I laughed when Hillary Clinton goes, if I'm elected president, I'm going to tell him, you can promise
they are telling a temporary employee, Jack. You are a temporary employee, man. You do not have a need to know.
And people know where you live.
Yeah.
So for me, I thought, I don't want to predict, but I would say, I have my own personal feelings about this, and that is, are we really ready? Are we really ready for this? And, just talking about some of my personal encounters with people and talking to them, my family, for example, other people who go, oh, yeah, Ray, you wrote these books. They don't want to hear it. They're like, nah. So I don't know if they're ready, and so I'm not going to be like, the guy pounding the table, Steve Bassett, we got to have disclosure.
I just had him on about a month ago, and he was like, you can be ready for Big D disclosure by the end of summer. So I'm looking for when people stop wearing white. That's my official Labor Day. By Labor Day, he said. When the pools close and the kids go back to school, we'll know. But yeah. And I will take Steve Bassett's word as he is the lobbyist of lobbyists when it comes to that. He has been lobbying for disclosure and opening things for a long, long time. But
what will it take for people to believe, right? I mean, there's pictures of flying saucers in the congressional hearings.
They say...
What do they need?
We needed to land on the White House lawn. How about a fleet of them flying over the White House and pictures of it?
1952.
How about that?
It happened in 52.
Yeah, we were on alert for weeks. People flying over the Capitol.
That's what happened. What will it take?
What more do you need?
These guys are showing, we got some anomalous metal. Well, that's fine, but where did it come from? I bury a piece of metal in the desert for 50 years. Regardless of how it started, it's going to be anomalous when you pull it out. There's going to be some seepage. So
there's going to be mineralization that gets sucked into pores, all kinds of things. And
what will it take for people to go, all right, you got me,
Well, and, once again, I talk about my dad because he is one of them that's like, little green man, what are you talking about? You're crazy. All right, well, let's just talk about fiscal accountability because, once again, were you cool with the Pentagon Papers that said that we went into Vietnam under totally false pretenses to make millions of dollars and sell opium? And
right.
Were you okay with Iran-Contra? Because apparently, from what Grush is saying, there has been a money shift going on since 1939 into the realm of billions and billions of dollars.
Well, I have a personal story about that.
Please.
I spent 2 weeks in an office in the Pentagon, and the office is the liaison office to Congress.
Oh.
So they have a book there, like, does the Air Force still have monkeys? You go to the book under M for monkeys, and you look at it, and you see what the current posture is on the Air Force. So the representative gets contacted, and he wants an answer. So you go to the book, and you Xerox a letter, you fill in the blanks to address the issue, and it says whatever is in the book, because that's the Air Force response. So I spent 2 weeks there, and they were showing me around, and I look, and a lady that I was being introduced to had a picture of Fawn Hall, the major secretary, on her wall. And I thought, well, this has got to be some kind of local Washington, D.C. joke because this is the Pentagon, right? And I said, this is really dumb, and I know this is personal, and I know I just met you, but isn't that Fawn Hall? She goes, absolutely. And I said, now I got another dumb question. Why do you have a picture of Fawn Hall in your cubicle? She goes, because she's my sister.
Wow.
And then she and I had a very interesting conversation about a lot of stuff.
Wow.
And so you never know where the next tidbit of information is going to come from.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe Fawn Hall's going to come out and tell her story.
We get deathbed confessions regularly. We get books, interviews from people as they leave this world that reveal all kinds of things, Ray.
So there I was, and I went, hey, man, thank you very much. And and I didn't even ask her, like, why was she burning stuff? And
yeah.
I didn't know.
What was that
Did
about?
she tell you she was a good shredder? And, no, I just went, you know, I'm really sorry about asking that question.
Best data collector ever. Rick, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, Ray. It was more than a pleasure chatting with you. Let the audience know where they can go to pick up your books. Of course, other than the Curious Realm store. We'll be adding them all to the Curious Realm store, things like that. But let them know where they can go to follow your work and keep up with everything you do.
Okay, great. The books are available on Amazon, so you can find them there. Okay. I have a friend who runs a bookstore in a small town in Michigan. It's called the Fenton Open Book, like Fenton, Missouri, except this is in Fenton, Michigan. It's called Fenton's Open Book, and I have a connection there because my mother is in a home not too far away. So regularly I will drop off a box of autograph copies for her. And the final place is, and this is a secret now a widely known secret, if you want autograph copies and get them online, you can go to the National Museum of the United States Air Force. And in their bookstore and in their gift shop, I live 5 minutes away from the museum. Every month I take a box of books there and I dump them off at the museum.
The Air Force actually has, the Air Force Museum is actively selling your books.
And they're actually selling book 1 and book 3. Book 2, which was about a family who's had a lifetime of alien contact, was just something that they could not swallow.
A little too much.
So I've been doing that for...
That's still remarkable, though.
About 4 or 5 years. 4 or 5 years, and I don't have the guts to go, hey, how about book 2? But maybe. We need one more congressional inquiry, and maybe we can get that book in there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, 50 Shades of Grays, Swamp Gas My Ass, Alien Shades of Grays. Those are his books, folks. The work is amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
During the MUFON Symposium.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. While you are online checking out all of the amazing work of Ray Szymanski, make sure to stop on by CuriousRealm.com. That's where you can find all the episodes. CuriousRealm.com/story is where you can go to share your story of extraterrestrial encounter, Bigfoot, cryptid encounters. Let us know your story. Give us your evidence. We have a Dropbox there where you can put in your photos, video. We will present it to our experts and see what answers we can get for you on your case. Stay tuned through these commercial breaks. We will be right back with our continuing coverage of Day 2 of MUFON Symposium here in Covington, Kentucky, right after this, folks.